Good morning and welcome to round 2 of the Nantucket Book Festival. We're so happy to see you. We're so glad you're with us. And we are particularly thrilled to welcome author Imani Perry with us. She... Writer, scholar, professor, historian, winner of the National Book Award and a MacArthur Fellow, which is the Genius Award. It is thrilling to have Imani Perry, who is with us with Black and Blues, How a Color Tells the Story of My People. Imani, you wrote, "We human beings are built to love and share stories. It is one of the best ways to connect, and I can't think of a better way to start because you are a human that I love, both as a storyteller, but as an historian. And also this soulful person who can connect these dots to bring the color blue into the frame of being Black. What is the origin of this book idea, asking on this island with blue skies and blue seas? How did the color blue come to connect those dots?"
Well, first of all, it is absolutely wonderful to be here. I love you, and I love being at the Nantucket Book Festival every single time. So it's an honor and a joy. So, part of the answer is that it was organic. It's something that I began to notice, this sort of symbolism around the color blue everywhere I turned, and particularly in contemporary artists. African American, but also the African diaspora and the continent. But the story begins in my grandmother's home, my late grandmother's home, and her blue room. And my young cousin, then he was around 6, he also loves the color blue, Ian. And we were talking in my grandmother's bedroom, which was painted blue. There were blue drapes, blue prayers in the corner of the vanity mirror, pictures of bluebirds on the wall. I did not know then that it was her favorite color, but I actually know now. My aunt told me. So I asked Ian, "What's your favorite color blue?" And he points up and he says, "That one." And it's in, the ceiling had been dropped and there was a tile missing from some of my male cousin's antics. And you could see the original color blue of the room, and it was this bright sky blue, and it was like a portal. And so there actually is something about that place and that room, which in so many ways was my first home, that became sort of an orientation for me to attend to color, but also to both the love and the grief and the joy and the sorrow that I experienced in that central place in my life. So perhaps I was geared towards noticing blue from the very beginning.
Because you do. You talk about a portal to a perspective, to a prism of examination.
Yeah.
And you said becoming Black is both a parable and a process. And the color that best teaches this is blue, with its hues of melancholy and wonder.
Yeah, it's true. And, of course, the immediate associations are with the blues and the blue note, which is that fundamentally American musical sound, but also has these origins in West Africa and also in Scotland. And there's this way that it becomes, the blue note is both talked about as that note that sort of is errant, that's off in the scale, but it's the exception that makes the sound of the music generally, but it actually is also, it's not the outlier in a blue, what we call now a blues scale. It's actually central to it. So that thing of sort of being outsider within is captured by the color blue. And blue is contrapuntal, right? It is both melancholy and joy, right? It's simultaneously. So it's really potent as a symbol. So I think that's part of the reason it kept being invoked. Part of it, yeah.
Well, because, back to your music then, because, you talk about for the enslaved, a blue note, like thoughts and imaginings beyond those that claim to own you.
Yeah.
Because those are thoughts that could not be owned, and music was a thread that was pulled through all of the enslaved populations.
Absolutely.
And its movement to music, a blue note.
Yeah.
So what did blues mean to you? What did the blues as music, as that blue note, mean to you?
It's a wonderful question. Part of it is that I think at the center of the cultural tradition out of which I come, that of the Black South, I was born in Birmingham, Alabama, that's my root. There is this practice of creating beauty at the very site of wound that is a cultural practice. It's not an evasion of the hurt. It's not an evasion of the sorrow. It's an acknowledgement of it, but to create beauty there as an expression of one's fullness of humanity. So that's part of what the blues does, right? The blues as a genre of music, right? You know, the blues is often tells stories of sorrow and heartbreak, but it's also humorous. And as the great critic Albert Murray used to say, you play the blues to get over the blues, right? And so there's this transformative possibility in it. And that, to me, is the core, right? And it is so fundamentally human. There's a universal quality to it, even as it's very specific. And I'll just say this one thing about the blues, because my grandmother's home, which is where I started, the night before my very first launch event for the book, January 27th, I received a text in the middle of the night, and it was my grandmother's home in flames. And no one was hurt, but the home burned down the night before this book, and that is, it's my blues, right? And so my grandfather's piano is gone, my cousin's upright bass is gone, photographs, the furniture she protected so carefully, and of course the blue room. But a couple of things survived. My grandfather's flag from World War II, and the diplomas of all. My grandmother sent 12 children out of Jim Crow, Alabama to college. And so all the diplomas were preserved. And so they're even in that, that's a blues song, what happened. But there's also something that we have to hold on to. And in some ways, now the house is gone, but it's in the book. It lives in the book. So, that's the process.
Well, I find that incredibly inspiring, because that is the most devastating loss, is to lose all the physical aspects of the things you carry.
Yeah.
And how did the rest of your family deal with that kind of a loss?
So it's interesting because we're dealing with it in various ways, right? There's a grief that is settled, but it's almost as though I talk about in the book sort of the moving tabernacle. That's part of the cultural tradition. So we started a family book club. I'm actually not involved in it. I showed up, but there's a way in which we're sort of rebuilding in our practices. And this is not the first major loss. The book is dedicated to two of my cousins who have died over the past couple of years. One of whom, and I talk about this at the very end, but it's not the kind of book where it would be a spoiler. But my aunt asked us all to wear blue to his funeral because that was his favorite color. And he had a blue blanket that he wore in the hospital, and so we all wore blue. And then an aunt shared seeds for us to plant blue flowers in our yards afterwards. And so so it was this repetition of sort of reconnecting after these, seasons of grieving. And so we're doing that still. So we're connecting virtually in this book club because we can't gather in the home anymore. Right?
That is so beautiful. But when you talk about the power, again, of that color, so you're dressing in blue, you're planting blue flowers, which again portends a future in which blue flowers will bloom.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. One of the things I talk about in the book is that in the Upper South, it's a historical narrative, but told unconventionally. But you see, for those, you may have seen them, but oftentimes in the Upper South, you'll see patches of periwinkle flowers on the ground. And that is often an indication that that is where enslaved people are buried, because without their traditional burial rituals and without headstones, right, there had to be a place a way to mark the grave site. And so periwinkle are hardy flowers. They're not native to, West Africa. So this was a tradition that was established here, and so you can move around and see. And one of the things I say is home is where your dead are buried. It's a way of laying claim to the space with beauty, again. And as you said, and then it lives, right? And the body's
it lives on.
Yeah.
And it's a light. But when you talk about that, it does, of course, bring me to the color indigo.
Yeah.
And I said the heart of your writing, you bring the humanity of the enslaved to life, because that within these lives, many of which are totally lived in enslavement, that you still, you capture the fact that these are heroic people who muster joy and life in unspeakable circumstance. And it's a heroic rendering of these lives that you present.
Thank you.
And it's through the color blue and indigo, which is more than just a color indigo. Explain what indigo means.
Yeah, so indigo is, it's a plant, right? And there's this complex dyeing process of cultivation to create the dye that is pretty horrible, right? Now, indigo captured the imagination of the world. It's such a gorgeous color, and is more color fast than woad, which is what was being used in Western Europe earlier in history. And so, and it's cultivated all over Asia and in Africa as well. And so I tell the story about sort of the way in which the indigo trade expanded, how it became appealing to Europeans, and then the beginning of its cultivation in South Carolina. But the central thing, I'll say a few things about it, but the central thing that I wanted to get a sense of is that for West Africans who were cultivating indigo, at a certain point in history, and that was being traded with Europeans, at a certain point in history, that process of being a craftsperson pivots for a critical mass of people, because instead of creating indigo cloth, they begin to be sold and traded for indigo. So imagine being a person who's a craftsperson, a fine craftsperson, who then sees oneself exchanged for a block of dye, right? And this is the complication of beauty. I try not to be too, sentimental or Pollyanna-ish, right? Because it is gorgeous, but it's also feeds greed.
Huge human cost. It was at enormous
massive
human cost.
Yeah.
And the process of production, you should say that too.
Yeah, I mean, the process of production is, it makes people sick. There's flies, and it smells terribly, and it nauseates, and it permanently dyed hands and arms of people who worked in indigo in the slave trade in South Carolina in particular. And yet, and this is part of what is so fascinating to me, and I don't want to go on too long, but I tell the story of an unnamed black man who is the origin point for the cultivation of indigo in this country. But the taste for the color and the dye did not die, even as it became a tool for enslavement, right? So the very thing that was being one was driven to produce, it still had its appeal, and I think there's something very powerful in that. So I tell this.
We want you to read the book, but there are amazing stories, because then the enslaved people would find ways that they would take these little blocks of dye, and they would dye their own clothing. And so a wedding, which of course was not sanctioned, but it was their own way of preserving their traditions, and it would be a blue wedding dress.
Blue wedding dress. Yeah. The ceilings of porches, for those of y'all have been in South Carolina, where you see the bright blue ceilings, haint blue, that is a color blue that was initially enslaved people used to protect from evil spirits, right? So there's all these uses of blue, pleasures that are taken in blue as well, indigo blue specifically.
Exactly. So we just want to say really what is remarkable about Imani's writing is that the heart is always present. You feel the humanity of the people that she writes about. You feel that within circumstance that none of us could possibly imagine, these are people that created lives and children and love and joy and traditions and dance and music. And it's heroic. And it is such a reminder that all of us could be so much more than we ever imagine. And one of the things, and I brought props too.
Oh, yes.
Education was something denied to the enslaved. They were forbidden to learn to read and write, and you can imagine their enslavers could be terrified if they actually had the tools to understand and communicate in the world. So learning to read and write was such a threat. And here again, the color blue threads into something so powerful, and that is something that I learned about through you, called the original blueback speller by Noah Webster. And now there's a reason that we're bringing this up, and we brought the props. And go ahead.
Yeah, it's such a... So all throughout slave narratives and writings of the early, sort of in the postbellum period, you have people talking about the blueback speller. And Noah Webster wrote this in order for people to teach themselves to read easily. It's organized for autodidacts, Webster of the dictionary, right? And so this book, and this is, it became the most precious artifact. And so people, whether it's Booker T. Washington, George Washington Carver, they talk about the way this book opened the world to them. Right, and so, and one of my, it's not in the book, but I'm sorry, I just have to tell this story because it's so beautiful. There's a boy, John McPrine, who was 10 years old, and he is living in the Clover Bottom Plantation in Tennessee, and Union soldiers come up to him and they say, "Hey, do you want to be free?" And so he goes and follows them, and he works throughout the war. Is on the battlefield and the like, and this is a largely white regiment. After one of the core battles of the Civil War, he sees for the first time black soldiers, and they said, "Well, you can come in our tent and we'll talk to you." And he's a kid, right, working on the battlefield, and he walks into the tent, and everyone is reading with these books, and his entire imagination is transformed. I wish I had read the story before I finished the book, but there's other good stories about it. But it's such a sign of how literacy was attached to freedom for Black people, right? And the immediacy in which people went to school and built school, and so and imagined. And so in this artifact, there's a world of aspiration, hope, possibility, and also self-creation.
And for their families, because then they would secretly teach their children. But we have a thread of history here, because one of the people for whom this original blueback speller was profound was Frederick Douglass, who a lot of islanders here and a lot of people here understand the history is he came here as a newly emancipated, but I don't believe totally freed enslaved person when he was here at the Athenaeum. And he gave the most powerful, he was a beautiful orator, and he gave the most beautiful speech, which really on this island ignited an entire kind of abolitionist group. And really, this was always a very spunky, independent island that was very ahead of its time. It was a Quaker island, so it celebrated the inner light of every man, woman, and child, which was a profound thought at the time. And so this was an island that really garnered around this idea of freedoms. And Frederick Douglass was one of the people for whom he was a boy, and he learned to read and write with this book. It's so profound. The span of your writing, which really is a net of scholarship and thought across 7 books, I want to say?
9.
9. Oh my goodness. Wow. Wow. I mean, she is really the thinker of our time. But what is what's the connective thread for you across all of the enormous writing that you do?
Yeah. It's such, well, what part of it is what you mentioned earlier, is that one of the things that was clear to me is that I wanted to be a person who used the skills of academic research, of being a scholar, but used them not in the service of having a conversation simply among scholars, but use it in the service of telling stories more broadly. And in that sense, to tell stories that not only could make the reader think, but also feel. And that is always, always for me has its root in deep belief in the beloved community, and the possibilities of us being in right relation with each other. Right, that's the sort of the energy that is carried through all of the work.
You wrote, "We human beings are built to love and share stories. It is one of the best ways to connect."
Yeah, and storytelling, you learn, so academic writing is about making arguments, right? But people, unless you're trained you don't remember argument, you do remember story. And so the idea for me is to embed these sets of hopes in the storytelling and hope that the stories resonate. And people live with them, so that even if someone reads my work and doesn't agree, the idea is it's still an invitation, to possibly allow the relationship, because a book is a relationship, multiple relationships with readers, to be transformative and even mutually transformative, which is why I love festivals, because I then have these conversations where I can be transformed as well.
Yeah. Well, you're getting to understand her voice and the humanity within this voice and all of her writing, and that's what I'm always struck by. It brings you in because you are pulled by story, you're pulled by humans, that you begin to feel the lives that she's expressing, and of course the larger systemic issues that we all need to be passionately concerned with. And that does lead me to this one, because you delve into such hard places, our hard but very real American history and what it is to be Black in America. Mm-hmm. And how do you manage to lift the heavy and yet hold our hearts?
I mean, I think that's the blues tradition. So the book is standing in that tradition, I feel. So one of the things that I do, I try not to have a sort of dispassionate relationship to the stories I encounter. I'm learning from them as well, right? And so I'll say it this way. We had a whole season of lots of books, and many of them outstanding, that were teaching the story of the injustices of racism, right? And oftentimes, I think, one of the costs of the emphasis on that story and the kind of instruction logic is that it de-emphasized beauty, because in the service of the argument. I actually think that there is great value in talking about what it is to fully be human in the face of all of that. And that is both bolstering to me, but I think it also actually makes injustice much more clear, that it's not, when you recognize the fullness of a person or the fullness of a people, then I actually think that allows the sense of injustice to begin to stir more deeply. So in order to do that, I have to talk about joy. I have to talk about love. I can't just talk about the pain. And I wasn't raised to do so. We had an enormous amount of joy in my family of origin. We are not a migration family. My children are the first generation born out of the state of Alabama, and also an absolutely glorious living in so many ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's beautiful, and you're raising two beautiful sons. And I think there is a way to find the joy. So how do you deal with this writing life? How do you decide? How do you even structure? I think everyone always wants to know, how does a writer do it? Do you have like a plan? Do you get up every morning and say, I have to write this many? How do you do it?
Well, no, because I've been raising kids for 21 years, so sort of like got adjusted to writing little notes. I use my notes app on my phone, and I So I write every day and I read every day, but that might be a sentence, right? Because you have to work in the margins. Although this is new because I'm an empty nester now. My youngest child went to college.
So different.
It's so different. So I can actually spend long stretches of luxurious time writing.
All by yourself.
And I do, right, I know, it's amazing. And everybody's like, oh, you must be so sad. No, not really, I'm good. I mean, I adore my kids, but you know. But there is, right. I do a lot of structuring, a lot of outlining. I pay a lot of attention to rhythm and pacing and wanting to get sort of a multi-sensory experience for the reader. And so that combination, music is a huge inspiration for me.
What are you listening to when you're writing?
So I can't listen while I'm writing because I'm too distractible. The music always wins. I love music so much. I mean, it's always going to win. But I do, I mean, in terms of the musicians that are direct influences, Thelonious Monk is always a direct influence for me in terms of writing because of the way he deals with repetition, but also, you know, the errant note that actually becomes part of the composition. So the thing that you think doesn't quite fit, but actually then makes the whole thing more beautiful. So that is an iterative process. That's revision. That's repetition. That's taking out large sections. This doesn't work anymore, right? I'm not trying to tell comprehensive stories. I'm trying to tell stories that paint a vivid picture. So it, you know, it could have been, this book could be 8 times as long as it is. But that wouldn't be it wouldn't be right. It wouldn't work as a composition that way. So
right. Well, there is. So yeah, you walked right into this one because there is, what I say, within your voice, the cadence of your language. There's grace, kindness, compassion. It's like the lyrical beauty of your writing is juxtaposed against these violent truths. So I wanted you to read that on page 166 because, I mean, there were so many, actually, just to show. It's a very, I could have actually done every page. The writing is so gorgeous, and the thoughts are so profound. You have to buy this book. The thoughts are so profound. But I loved that this is so much your lyrical beauty.
Okay, thank you. I do not ask whether things are better, though they should be even better than this. And the real question I ask is, how is it that we have kept our hearts and souls reaching? Because that is what is worth saving. Black Americans are a people, but a very young one. We are older than the United States, but born in the colonial period. Older than Nigerians as national citizens, but younger than the Yoruba or Igbo people of that nation. We are old among the young and very young among the old, and for that reason it makes sense that our connections to others. How far should I go? Oh,
just to finish the paragraph.
Okay. Other Black people and other Americans remain resilient regardless of the borders of nation, state, or status.
It's just everything she writes. The other thing, and again, it goes back to the power of threading humanity in this larger story, but you thread a sense of the divinity of a person held within and lived, and you wrote of the God within us and the importance of storytelling, and the lesson, you said, was that the study and writing only matter insofar as they are pursued in the service of what is good and humane.
Absolutely.
Your chrysalis must be built with care so that you can emerge with your natural human holiness intact. Talk about that.
I mean, I believe it, you know, and this is another piece for me I'm not simply making arguments. I'm not simply making, doing research for the sake of research. And I see in the symbolism and in the uses of the color blue, whether we're talking about its use in Haiti and Vodun, or in the Haitian Revolution, as I talk about, or in hoodoo, that kind of folk cultural practice in the Deep South, where blue powder is this essential ingredient. There is an attention to spirit and spirituality, and so I am also attending to that in my work and seeing it. I've been thinking frequently about Maya Angelou saying in one of her interviews, "We didn't come here to stay." Okay? And so then what do we do while we're here? And that, how do we build the meaningful life? And that is what I am trying to do, but also what I'm trying to communicate in the pages and attend to in the people's stories that I bring to the page.
And that is what you do. And, Ocean Vuong said, I think that at the heart of every writer, you have to really love the world, even when it's difficult to love.
Absolutely.
And it seems you love the world, Imani.
Oh, I do, deeply. I mean, why are we here otherwise? And there's, and this is, again, I am, of course, I'm a booster, as you know, I'm a booster for the South, and the Deep South in particular. It's so stunning, and you think about there's this incredible violence and cruelty, and also just this sort of majestic vistas, So even the state of Alabama, it has its head in Appalachia, right in the mountain territory, its toes in the Gulf Coast, its heart in Birmingham region, and its belly in the Black Belt. All of those are distinct landscapes, all beautiful, all varying, also all with distinct cruelties. And so, it's the saving grace. The beauty is the saving grace, and that's natural beauty. But in so many ways, the beauty becomes a saving grace. Yeah.
Well, it's my favorite Leonard Cohen quote, there is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And Imani, you let the light into our cracked and broken world, and you give us hope.
It's interesting you say that, because I love that, because I don't think of myself as a particularly hopeful person. But I think what I'm trying to do, so Gwendolyn Brooks she would talk about living in the along, right? And so I'm trying to live as fully in the along. And I do think that feels like something to hold on to, and a sense of possibility. So that's where I think the hope probably comes in, because I'm often pretty pessimistic, but I'm not. But we don't. It's unethical, I think, not to have something to hold on to, particularly if you have children or grandchildren. We have to actually be giving everyone something to hold on to. Yeah.
But look at this radiant being. It radiates. It radiates the hope in humanity. We have time for just a few questions.
Thank you so much. This was a beautiful conversation. I recently reread your 2021 article about Gail Jones.
Yes.
And I was thinking about her a lot with the recent success of a new novel in relation to your book, Black and Blues. And I wanted to know if in the last 4 years she strikes me as a novelist who's rooted in a blues sensibility, and I was wondering if your thinking about her work and her milieu has changed in the 4 years since you wrote that piece.
That's really interesting. I don't know so much if my thinking has changed. I will say, so this is a profile that I wrote for the Sunday New York Times, the magazine, which was a finalist for a National Magazine Award. And also, I say the sort of but to that is, that's an intense editorial process. So I have many more pages on Jones than the piece would allow. So I don't know if it's changed as much as I think that I am returning to figures like Gail Jones. Gail Jones is someone who is, for lack of a better term, a hermit. She's not interested in talking to anyone. I did go to look around her neighborhood a little bit, but I knew that I wasn't going to speak to her in the process. And there is a way that she, particularly not in this novel, which Unicorn Woman, but the last one that came out, Palmares, her attention to sound and color and scent and landscape is deeply influential to me. And storytelling in particular in Kentucky, which is her home. So there's a resonance there in terms of what she does masterfully and what I'm trying to do. I'll just say that she is the writer who Toni Morrison was her editor and said of her after she wrote her first novel, Corregidora, that the literary tradition was transformed forever. Yeah.
Anyone? Yeah.
How do you try and incorporate that?
I'm sorry, say that again.
The multi-sensory experience that you're trying to incorporate in your writing? Can you talk about how you incorporate multi-sensory experiences in your writing?
Yeah, so beyond the literal, right, we're talking about sound and scent, right, and color, it's almost a way of trying to attend to use language in such a way that the reader feels the things that we experience without describing them as such. So, so for example, when heat pressing in, right? So it feels like you're being touched and pushed even, right? So it is trying to actually sort of account for the experience. And one of the, I'll just say it's not an aside, but when there's all these, there's lots of storytelling about slave ships, but when I did it in this book, I wanted to both capture the horror, but the range of sensory and emotional experiences on a ship, which meant that I was also talking about the crews that were largely Europeans, and the ship's crews on slave ships were also often abused and brutalized, not to the same extent that the enslaved were. They're not in the hold of the ship, they're above ship, but it's rocking, and there's violence they experience, and some of them are pressed into service. So there's both the literal accounting of the stratification of this on the ship, which becomes the stratification of the modern period. But I don't just want to say that in the way that I'd say it in a scholarly article. I want people to feel it, right? And to feel it requires something more than description, right? It actually requires trying to give that I don't even know, the sympathetic vibration that allows a person through words to remember what pain is like and what the stench is, and to have the sort of multisensory experience as you're reading. I try, right? I mean, I don't, it's up to the reader to decide whether it's successful, but yeah, thank you.
I just wanted to make an observation where, there are two themes that you brought up: the blue back speller,
Mm-hmm.
and then haint blue.
Mm-hmm.
And we just heard from Geraldine Brooks, who in her novel Horse, Jarrett the groom was, I don't know, I have to go back now and check the book, but I wonder if it actually names the blue back speller. This is, a slave who was learning to read. And then
Probably, yeah.
we're going to be hearing from Alice Hoffman,
Yes.
who is famous for using the word haint blue. So I just wonder if the literary gods got you all in the same room on the same day.
That is such a good one, because I forgot about, I loved Geraldine Brooks' book Horse, and I forgot about that detail. Good for you to thread that one with our larger theme.
And can I tell a quick little story about her late husband, Tony Horwitz, who I read Confederates in the Attic, and this is when writing South to America, and he tells us, he talks about meeting all these Confederate reenactors, and I was thinking he was an incredibly lovely person, and I remember driving to Appalachia as I was writing South to America and thinking, well, he could speak to Confederates, they won't talk to me, blah, blah, blah. Like, I'm sort of being grumpy about it. And think, and then, like, the first person I meet is a Confederate reenactor. And we have this incredible exchange that is, like, at the center of the beginning of that book. Yeah, so there's always, this way, because, there's an intellectual and a spiritual energy that's moving through the creative world always. So, yeah.
And that's really why, again, we're so glad to see all of you, because, our overarching theme this year really is, reading widely, becoming more. We each become a little bit more with every bit of information we take in, and with the books that we read. I hope our hearts are all enlarged. So this morning we say, Imani Perry, thank you for gracing us.
Thank you.